Thomas had always been a curious boy who loved to explore old places and discover new things. And when his family moved to the old house at the edge of the small village, he knew that his life was about to become much more interesting than before. The house was very old and had many rooms that nobody had entered for many years. And Thomas could not wait to see what secrets the building might be hiding from the world. His parents warned him to be careful, but they knew that their son would never listen to such advice when adventure was calling his name so loudly. On the first night in the new house, Thomas could not sleep because he kept hearing strange sounds coming from somewhere deep inside the walls. The sounds were soft at first, like whispers that floated through the air, and then they became louder, like someone was knocking on wood, from a place that seemed very far away. His younger sister Emma came into his room because she had also heard the mysterious sounds, and she looked scared as she sat on the edge of his bed. Thomas told her not to worry and promised that he would find out what was making all that noise. But deep inside his heart, he felt a little bit afraid too. The next morning, Thomas woke up early and decided to search the house for any clues that might explain the strange sounds from the night before. He started in the attic, where old boxes and furniture were covered with thick layers of dust that made him sneeze again and again. He found many interesting things in the attic, including old photographs of people he did not know and letters that were written in a language he could not understand. But the most interesting thing he found was a small golden key that was hidden inside an old wooden box that had strange symbols carved into its surface. Thomas put the key in his pocket and continued his search through the house, checking every room and looking behind every piece of furniture. He did not know what the key might open, but he had a strong feeling that it was important and that he needed to find the lock that matched it. His mother called him down for breakfast, and Thomas had to stop his exploration for a little while. At the table, he asked his parents if they knew anything about the history of the house, and his father told him that the building was more than 200 years old and had belonged to a family of explorers who had traveled all around the world. This information made Thomas even more excited about his search, and he could barely finish his food before rushing back upstairs to continue looking for clues. His sister Emma wanted to help him, and he agreed to let her join his adventure because 2 pairs of eyes were better than 1. Together, the 2 children searched every corner of the house, and by the afternoon they had looked in almost every room. But they had not found anything that the golden key might fit into, and Thomas was starting to feel disappointed and tired. Emma suggested that they should look in the basement, which was the only part of the house they had not explored yet. Thomas agreed, even though he did not like dark places very much, and the 2 children made their way down the old wooden stairs that led into the darkness below. The basement was cold and smelled like old earth and forgotten memories. Thomas used a flashlight to see where they were going, and the beam of light showed them walls made of old stone and a floor covered with dust that nobody had walked on for a very long time. They searched the basement for what felt like hours, moving old boxes and looking behind piles of broken furniture. And then, just when Thomas was about to give up, Emma called out to him from the far corner of the room. She had found something hidden behind a large wooden cabinet that someone had pushed against the wall. When Thomas moved the cabinet out of the way, he could not believe what he saw with his own eyes. There, in the wall, was a small door that was no bigger than a window. It was made of dark wood and had metal decorations that looked like stars and moons, and in the center of the door was a small keyhole that seemed to glow slightly in the dim light. Thomas took the golden key from his pocket, and his hands were shaking as he brought it close to the keyhole. The key slid into the lock perfectly, like it had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. He turned the key slowly, and there was a clicking sound that echoed through the basement like a heartbeat. The door began to open by itself, revealing a dark passage that led somewhere deep underground. A warm wind came out of the passage and touched their faces, carrying with it a smell that was sweet and strange. Thomas looked at his sister, and she looked back at him with wide eyes full of wonder and fear. They both knew that they had discovered something very special, something that had been hidden for many years and was now ready to share its secrets with them. But they also knew that whatever was waiting for them on the other side of that door might change their lives forever. Thomas took a deep breath and stepped forward into the darkness, with Emma holding onto his hand and following close behind. They did not know what they would find, but they were ready for whatever adventure awaited them in the mysterious passage beneath the old house. The passage was narrow and dark, and Thomas had to duck his head to avoid hitting it on the low ceiling. Emma walked behind him, still holding his hand tightly, and the only sound they could hear was the echo of their footsteps on the stone floor. They walked for what seemed like a very long time, and Thomas began to wonder if the passage would ever end. But then, suddenly, the narrow tunnel opened up into a large underground room that took their breath away. The room was filled with a soft golden light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. The walls were covered with beautiful paintings of forests and mountains and strange animals that neither Thomas nor Emma had ever seen before. In the center of the room, there was a large stone table with many objects placed on its surface. Thomas walked closer to see what was there, and he found books with leather covers, glass bottles filled with colorful liquids, and a large crystal ball that seemed to swirl with colors inside it. Emma pointed to something in the corner of the room, and when Thomas looked, he saw a large mirror with a frame made of silver and gold. But this was not an ordinary mirror, because when he looked into it, he did not see his own reflection at all. Instead, the mirror showed a beautiful garden filled with flowers of every color and trees with leaves that sparkled like diamonds. There were strange birds flying in the sky, and in the distance, Thomas could see tall towers that reached up into the clouds. He reached out to touch the mirror, and his hand went right through the glass like it was made of water. Emma gasped in surprise, and Thomas quickly pulled his hand back, his heart beating fast with excitement and fear. They had found something truly magical, something that should not exist in the real world. But here it was, right in front of them, waiting for someone brave enough to step through and discover what was on the other side. Thomas looked at his sister and asked her what she thought they should do. Emma was scared, but she was also curious, and after thinking for a moment, she told Thomas that they should at least try to learn more about this magical place before doing anything dangerous. They decided to look through the books on the stone table, hoping to find some answers to their many questions. The books were very old, with pages that were yellow and fragile, but the words inside them were still clear enough to read. Thomas opened the first book and began to read out loud so that Emma could hear. The book told the story of a family of explorers who had discovered a doorway to another world many years ago, a world filled with magic and wonder and creatures that could only exist in dreams. The explorers had built this underground room to protect the doorway from people who might use it for bad purposes. They had also created the golden key and hidden it in the attic, so that only someone with a pure heart and a curious mind could find it and unlock the secrets below. Emma asked Thomas if he thought the story was true, and he said that he was not sure. But everything they had seen so far made him believe that magic was real and that the doorway in the mirror actually led somewhere special. They continued reading the books for a long time, learning about the magical world and the creatures that lived there. They learned about the wise old trees that could speak and the rivers that flowed with water that could heal any wound. They also learned about the dangers that existed in that world, including dark forests where shadows came alive and mountains where fierce dragons made their homes. The books warned that anyone who entered the magical world should be careful and should never forget the way back home. Thomas felt a strong desire to step through the mirror and see the magical world with his own eyes. But he also knew that it would be foolish to go there without preparing first. So he and Emma decided to come back the next day with supplies and a plan. They carefully put everything back the way they found it and made their way back through the passage to the basement. When they climbed up the stairs and closed the door behind them, it felt like they had just woken up from the most amazing dream. At dinner that night, Thomas and Emma had to pretend that nothing special had happened. They talked about normal things and smiled at their parents, but inside their minds, they could think of nothing except a magical doorway hidden beneath their house. Thomas could not sleep that night because his mind was full of images from the underground room. He kept thinking about the garden in the mirror and the towers in the distance, and he wondered what adventures were waiting for him in that strange and beautiful world. The next morning, Thomas and Emma woke up early and gathered supplies for their journey. They packed food and water, a compass, a rope, and the golden key that had started this whole adventure. Their parents had gone to the village to buy groceries, so the children had the house to themselves. They went down to the basement, moved the cabinet, and used the key to open the hidden door once again. The passage seemed shorter this time, or maybe Thomas was just excited to reach the underground room. When they arrived, everything was exactly as they had left it, with the books on the table and the mirror glowing softly in the corner. Thomas took a deep breath and looked at his sister, and she nodded her head to show that she was ready. Together, they walked toward the mirror, their hearts beating with a mixture of fear and excitement. Thomas reached out his hand and touched the surface of the mirror, feeling the strange sensation of cool water on his fingers. He closed his eyes and stepped forward, and suddenly he felt himself falling through space like a leaf in the wind. When Thomas opened his eyes, he found himself lying on soft green grass in the most beautiful garden he had ever seen. Emma was right beside him, looking around with her mouth open in wonder and amazement. The sky above them was a deep shade of purple mixed with pink and gold, and two suns hung in the distance, one larger than the other. The air smelled like honey and flowers, and everything seemed to glow with a soft magical light. Thomas helped his sister stand up, and together they looked at the world they had entered. The garden stretched out in all directions, filled with flowers that were bigger than their heads, and trees with bark that shimmered like silver. Strange butterflies with wings made of crystal flew around them, making musical sounds as they moved through the air. Small furry creatures with big eyes watched them from behind the bushes, curious but not afraid. Emma laughed with delight and reached out to touch one of the giant flowers. When her fingers made contact with the petals, the flower made a soft humming sound and released a cloud of golden sparkles that floated up into the purple sky. Thomas took out the compass from his bag and tried to figure out which direction they should go. The needle spun around in circles at first, but then it stopped and pointed toward the tall towers they had seen in the mirror. They decided to walk toward the towers, hoping to find someone who could tell them more about this magical world. The path through the garden was easy to follow, with smooth stones that seemed to light up under their feet as they walked. After walking for a while, they came to a river that flowed with water that was completely clear and sparkled with tiny lights. A bridge made of woven vines stretched across the river, and on the other side, they could see a forest of trees with leaves of every color imaginable. Thomas tested the bridge with his foot to make sure it was safe, and when it held his weight, he and Emma crossed over to the other side. As soon as they entered the forest, they heard a voice calling out to them from somewhere above. They looked up and saw a small creature sitting on a branch with big pointed ears and fur that was bright blue. The creature had large golden eyes and wore a tiny hat made of leaves, and it was waving at them with a friendly smile. The creature introduced itself as Pip and said that it was a forest guardian whose job was to welcome visitors from other worlds. Pip seemed very excited to meet Thomas and Emma, explaining that no one had come through the mirror doorway for more than 100 years. Thomas asked Pip about the towers they had seen in the distance. And the guardian explained that the towers belonged to the city of Lumina, where the wise council that ruled the magical world lived and made important decisions. Pip offered to guide them to the city, and the children gratefully accepted the help. Having a guide who knew the land would make their journey much safer and easier. As they walked through the colorful forest, Pip told them stories about the magical world and its history. The guardian explained that the world was called Eldoria and that it had existed alongside the human world for thousands of years, connected by magical doorways that only special people could open. Emma asked why no one had visited for such a long time, and Pip's face became sad as the guardian explained. Many years ago, a dark force had threatened Eldoria, and the wise council had closed most of the doorways to protect both worlds from danger. Thomas asked if the dark force was still a threat, and Pip looked around nervously before answering in a quiet voice. The guardian said that shadows had been seen in the far mountains lately, and some believed that the darkness was returning to cause trouble once again. This news worried Thomas, but it also made him feel determined to help if he could. He had always dreamed of being a hero in a story, and now it seemed like he might have the chance to make that dream come true. They continued through the forest until they reached its edge, and what they saw beyond the trees made them stop and stare in silence. The city of Lumana spread out before them like a painting come to life. Towers of white stone rose into the purple sky, connected by bridges of light that seemed to hang in the air without any support. Gardens floated on clouds above the buildings, and waterfalls flowed upward instead of down, disappearing into the colorful sky. People walked through the streets below, but they were not like any people Thomas and Emma had ever seen. Some had wings like dragonflies, others had skin that changed color as they moved, and some floated a few inches above the ground. Pip led them down a winding path toward the city gates, which were made of a metal that glowed like the sun. 2 guards stood on either side of the gates, tall and strong, with armor that seemed to be made of solid light. The guards looked surprised to see human children approaching the city, but when Pip explained who they were and how they had arrived, the guards smiled and welcomed them warmly. They said that the wise council would be very interested to meet visitors from the other world. Thomas felt nervous but also excited as they passed through the gates and entered the magical city. He had no idea what adventures awaited them inside, but he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. Inside the city of Lumina, everything was even more wonderful than Thomas and Emma had imagined. Shops sold magical items that sparkled and glowed. Street performers made colorful shapes appear in the air, and everywhere they looked, there was something new and amazing to see. Pip led them through the busy streets toward the tallest tower in the center of the city. This was where the wise council held their meetings and made decisions that affected all of Eldoria. As they walked, the people of Lumana stopped to stare at the human children with curious and friendly expressions. Some waved and smiled, while others whispered to each other in excitement, clearly surprised to see visitors from the other world. They finally reached the base of the great tower, which was even more impressive up close. The walls were covered with carvings that seemed to move and change when Thomas looked at them, telling stories of heroes and adventures from long ago. A pair of grand doors swung open as they approached, revealing a staircase made of crystals that spiraled upward into the light. Pip told them that the wise council was waiting for them at the top, and they began the long climb together. When they reached the top of the tower, they found themselves in a large circular room with windows all around that showed views of the entire city and the lands beyond. In the center of the room sat 7 figures in a circle, each one different and remarkable in their own way. There was an old woman with hair like silver moonlight, a tall man with skin that sparkled like stars, a creature made entirely of living fire that did not burn anything it touched, and 4 others who seemed equally magical and wise. The council members welcomed Thomas and Emma with warm words and kind smiles. They said that they had felt the doorway open and had hoped that the visitors would find their way to Lumina. Thomas asked why the doorway had remained unused for so long, and the council members looked at each other before the old woman began to speak. She explained that a great darkness called the Shadow King had once tried to conquer Eldoria and had nearly succeeded. The Shadow King had been defeated long ago by heroes from both worlds working together, but his power had not been destroyed completely. It had been sealed away in the darkest mountain, guarded by magical barriers that kept it contained. But now, the barriers were weakening, and the Shadow King's power was beginning to leak out into the world once more. Dark creatures had been seen in the forests, and storms of shadow swept across the distant lands, spreading fear wherever they went. Emma asked what could be done to stop the darkness from returning, and the council members explained that only the light of the crystal star could strengthen the barriers and keep the Shadow King sealed forever. The crystal star was a magical object of great power that had been hidden long ago to keep it safe. Only a human with a pure heart could find it and use its power, because humans had a special connection to the light that the darkness could not corrupt. Thomas felt his heart beat faster as he realized what the council was asking them to do. They wanted him and Emma to find the crystal star and use it to save Eldoria from the returning darkness. He looked at his sister, and she looked back at him with determination in her eyes. She nodded her head slowly, and Thomas knew that she was ready to help, even though the task ahead would be difficult and dangerous. Thomas told the council that they would do their best to find the crystal star and save Eldoria. The council members smiled with relief and gratitude, and they gave the children gifts to help them on their journey. The old woman gave Thomas a small lantern that would never go out and would light his way through any darkness. The man with starlight skin gave Emma a cloak that would keep her warm and hidden from enemies who wished to harm her. Another council member gave them a map that showed the way to the place where the crystal star was hidden. It was in a cave at the top of a mountain called the Peak of Dawn, which stood at the eastern edge of Eldoria. Pip offered to guide them on their journey, and the council agreed that having a companion who knew the land would be very helpful. They also warned the children to be careful, because the Shadow King's servants would try to stop them once they learned of their quest. With their gifts and their map, Thomas, Emma, and Pip left the tower and began preparing for the long journey ahead. They gathered supplies from the kind people of Lumina, who gave them food that would never spoil and water bottles that would refill themselves. That night, they rested in a cozy inn, knowing that the next day would begin the hardest part of their adventure. Thomas lay awake for a long time, thinking about what was ahead, and hoping that he would be brave enough to face whatever challenges awaited. When morning came, the three companions set out from the city of Lumina, walking toward the rising suns and the distant mountains. Behind them, the people of the city watched and waved, putting their hope and trust in the human children who had come to save their world. The first part of the journey was easy, passing through rolling hills covered with soft grass and peaceful villages where friendly creatures offered them food and rest. But as they got closer to the mountains, the land began to change. The grass became brown and dry, the trees became twisted and bare, and the air grew cold with a chill that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. Pip explained that they were entering the region touched by the Shadow King's creeping power. Thomas held up his lantern, and its warm light pushed back the darkness around them. Emma pulled her magic cloak tight around her shoulders, feeling protected from the cold. They walked for many hours through the gloomy landscape until they saw the mountain they were looking for rising up ahead of them. The Peak of Dawn stood tall and proud, with its top hidden in clouds that glowed with a faint golden light. But between them and the mountain stood a dark forest filled with shadows that moved and whispered. Thomas knew that they would have to pass through this dangerous place to reach their goal, and he gripped his lantern tighter as they stepped forward into the darkness. The dark forest was the scariest place Thomas had ever been, with shadows that seemed to reach out toward them like hungry hands. but the light from his magical lantern kept the darkness away, creating a safe bubble of warmth around the three companions. Strange sounds echoed through the twisted trees, howls and whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Emma walked close to her brother, and Pip flew above their heads, keeping watch for any danger that might be lurking nearby. They had been walking through the forest for several hours when they heard something crashing through the trees behind them. Thomas turned around and saw creatures made of living shadow charging toward them, with glowing red eyes and claws like shards of ice. The shadow creatures stopped at the edge of the lantern's light, unable to enter the protective glow. They circled around the companions, hissing and snarling, waiting for the light to weaken. Thomas knew they had to keep moving, so he started walking faster, keeping the lantern raised high. The shadow creatures followed them through the forest, always staying just outside the light, waiting for a chance to attack. Finally, after what felt like forever, they reached the other side of the dark forest and stepped out into the light of the two suns. The shadow creatures screamed in anger and retreated back into the darkness, unable to follow them any further. The mountain stood before them now, tall and steep, with a path that wound up its side toward the clouds above. Thomas felt tired from the long journey, but he knew that they were close to their goal and could not give up now. They began climbing the mountain, following the narrow path that sometimes seemed too dangerous to walk on. Pip flew ahead to check for safe places to step, and Emma helped her brother when the rocks were too steep to climb alone. As they climbed higher, the air became thin and cold, and the clouds wrapped around them like a cold, wet blanket. But the magical cloak kept Emma warm, and the lantern's light showed them the way through the mist. After many hours of climbing, they finally reached the top of the mountain, where they found a cave opening that glowed with a soft golden light. This was the place they had been searching for, the hiding spot of the crystal star. They entered the cave and followed the golden light deeper inside until they came to a large chamber filled with crystals that grew from every surface. In the center of the chamber, floating above a stone pedestal, was the crystal star. It was the most beautiful thing Thomas had ever seen. A star made of pure light that sparkled with all the colors of the rainbow. He felt drawn toward it, like the star was calling out to him and asking him to come closer. But as he took a step forward, a deep voice echoed through the chamber, making the crystals shake and tremble. From the shadows at the far end of the cave, a figure emerged that made Thomas freeze with fear. It was a creature made of pure darkness, with eyes like burning coals, and a body that seemed to absorb all the light around it. This was a servant of the Shadow King, sent to guard the crystal star and stop anyone from using its power. The dark creature spoke in a voice like thunder and told Thomas that he was too weak to use the crystal star. It said that he should give up and go home, leaving Eldoria to fall into darkness. Thomas felt scared, and for a moment he almost believed what the creature was saying. But then he looked at his sister Emma and his friend Pip, and he remembered why they had come all this way. He thought about all the kind people in Lumana who were counting on him, and about the beautiful world of Eldoria that would be destroyed if he failed. He thought about his family back home and how proud they would be if he could be brave. Thomas raised his lantern high and walked toward the crystal star, even as the dark creature tried to block his path. The light from the lantern grew brighter and brighter, pushing the shadow creature back with every step. Emma ran to help her brother, adding her courage to his. She took his free hand and walked beside him, and together they moved toward the crystal star. The shadow creature screamed and threw darkness at them, but the light was too strong now. It surrounded Thomas and Emma like a shield, protecting them from the darkness. Thomas reached out and took the crystal star in his hand, and immediately he felt its power flow through him like warm sunshine. The star glowed brighter than ever before, filling the entire cave with pure golden light. The shadow creature dissolved into nothing, unable to survive in the presence of such powerful light. The darkness was completely destroyed, and the cave was filled with warmth and peace. Thomas knew what he had to do next. He held the crystal star up high and let its light shine out through the cave opening, sending beams of golden power across all of Aldoria. The light reached the dark mountain where the Shadow King was sealed and strengthened the magical barriers with new power. The darkness that had been leaking out was pushed back, and the Shadow King was locked away forever. All across Aldoria, the shadow creatures vanished. The dark clouds cleared away, and the sun shone brightly once again. The people cheered and celebrated, knowing that they had been saved by the brave humans from another world. Thomas and Emma made their way back down the mountain and through the lands that were now green and healthy again. Everywhere they went, people thanked them and gave them gifts. When they returned to Lumina, the Wise Council held a great celebration in their honor. The children were named heroes of Aldoria and were told that they would always be welcome in the magical world. But finally, it was time to go home. Thomas and Emma said goodbye to their friend Pip and promised to visit again soon. Then they stepped back through the magic mirror and found themselves in the underground room beneath their house. They climbed up through the passage and closed the hidden door behind them, keeping the secret safe for another day. When their parents came home, Thomas and Emma acted like nothing special had happened, but they shared knowing smiles with each other. That night, Thomas looked out his window at the stars and thought about all the adventures he had experienced. He knew that the magic was real, that heroes could be ordinary people, and that courage was something you found inside yourself when you needed it most. And somewhere far away, in a world of purple skies and floating gardens, a small blue creature named Pip looked up at the stars too, thinking about the brave friends who had saved everyone and hoping they would return someday for more adventures.